All right, so welcome. Um, how are you doing today?
Good. I just got a little late start here.
Oh, yeah. All right, yeah. So we'll go over a few things today. We had our DVOR meeting this week, which is always good. And we didn't have any cybernetics meeting or cognition futures. And we're holding off on our open source meetings until later in the year, so, or at least later in the spring. All right, so let's go and do. Let's start with some papers, I guess. Okay, yeah, actually no. Let's start with a couple of Slack items. So I put out a Darwin Day post on the Synthetic Daisies blog. This is something I'm going to cover in DevoWorm later on Monday. This is a review of carcinization from the biology to computational models. So carcinization is about how things keep turning into crabs in evolution. So if you go to the marine invertebrate clades, you get these crab phenotypes that are convergently evolved in the tree, in the clade of marine invertebrates. And so a lot of people have hypothesized why that is. And so kind of talk about the mechanisms behind carcinization, some of the systematics, and then also kind of the computational models people have used, ranging from network theory, people have used networks, to other types of models like genetic regulatory networks and genotype to phenotype mappings. So that's something to check out. In cognition futures, we've had a fair amount of activity recently. We had, let's see, I re-upped this paper, Reclaiming AI as a Theoretical Tool for Cognitive Science. I think this is especially useful for some of the things we've been talking about in terms of large language models and some other forms of AI that need to be reassessed using cognitive science. I also think it's kind of always good to go and revisit that cognitive science hexagon and recall where we're at. And so that's there. This is something that Morgan posted, Brains and Where Else, Mapping Theories of Consciousness to Unconventional Embodiments. This one here, which is from Nicole Rust on the transmitter. This is From Reductionism to Dynamical Systems, How Two Books Influenced My Thinking Across 30 Years of Neuroscience. This is a paper I found on dimensions and mechanisms of memory organization. We've been talking about memory in our cybernetics meetings. We haven't turned our attention to that in a couple weeks, but we talked about how the file drawer model of memory retrieval and memory organization, how that there are alternate forms of that, and how that may not be sufficient to really describe what happens in memory. And then this paper, this was actually, I had pinged Morgan on this is a paper on the aha moment. So this is where you have these insights that occur and you all of a sudden make sense of something. And then there's some organizational aspect to this where it's nonlinear. So it's not like you kind of have this insight after a certain amount of reflection, and that's cumulative. Like you don't come up with the parts and then you actually get the answer. It's like you suddenly get the answer from, after struggling with something for a while, and then it just kind of pops into your head. So that's what this is. And this is using an active inference approach. Let's go to some papers, actually. So this is a really interesting paper. This is something that I think it came out last June, but it's something I think Morgan found and put in the Slack. This is the BabyView dataset, high-resolution egocentric videos of infants and young children's everyday experiences. So this is, I don't think he actually put the paper in, but he put like a link to the group, and then this is one of their papers. So this is, like, you remember we were talking in earlier meetings last year about Linda Smith's work on developmental psychology and developmental cognitive science and developmental AI. And one of the things they did was put a GoPro camera on babies, and they filmed the interactions with the world. And so you find when you do that, that this sort of naturalistic view, that babies are engaging with the world in a much different way than adults. And so there are a bunch of ways in which that's true. And so this kind of has a different, it has a data set that sort of, I think, adds to that. So these are high resolution egocentric videos, meaning they're taken from the baby's point of view and looking out onto the world. Babies and young children, I guess. So let's read the abstract here. The abstract reads, human children far exceed modern machine learning algorithms in their sample efficiency, achieving high performance in key domains with much less data than current models. This data gap is a key challenge both for building intelligent artificial systems and for understanding human development. Egocentric video capturing children's experience, their training data, is a key ingredient for comparison of humans and models and for the development of algorithmic innovations to bridge this gap. Yet there are few such data sets available, and the ones that do exist are at low resolution, have limited metadata, and represent only a small set of children's experiences. So what they've done is they've assembled a BabyView dataset, which is this high-resolution camera capture with a large vertical field of view and gyroscope accelerometer data. So they're able to record head movements and a larger field of view and higher resolution interactions. So this is a 493-hour data set, including egocentric videos from children spanning 6 months to 5 years of age. So it's that sort of from infants to small children in both longitudinal at-home contexts and in a preschool environment. We provide gold standard annotations for the evaluation of speech transcription, speaker diarization, and human pose estimation, and evaluate models in each of these domains. So again, this is where you're getting interactions with voice, you're getting your vocalizations, you're getting interactions with objects, you're getting points of view, and then the pose of the person, and that's all kind of put together. We train self-supervised language and vision models and evaluate their transfer to out-of-distribution tasks, including syntactic structure learning, object recognition, depth estimation, and image segmentation. Although performance in each scales with data set size, overall performance is relatively lower than when models are trained on curated data sets, especially in the visual domain. Our dataset stands as an open challenge for robust human-like AI systems. How can such systems achieve human levels of success on the same scale and distribution of training data as humans? And that's a question, basically, can we bridge that, I guess, sampling gap or data gap? So the sampling efficiency, I think, is the key, where I guess what they're saying is that humans and maybe other animals they sample the world and they get much more out of it, or they sample it at maybe a lower rate, but get much more out of that sample. And so you have this data gap. You can throw a lot of data at a model and it only achieves a certain level of proficiency, whereas in biological brains, you get this you know, lowered sampling, but you get more out of it, I guess is the thing. And it just really depends on how you define sample, I suppose. Because, you know, we could say like, well, you know, we have a certain number of discrete images, but that's neither here nor there. I guess that's a good open question, is what is sampling efficiency and what's the difference between, like, say, a biological organism like a human or another animal and like artificial systems where we're feeding it data in discrete chunks. Even when we have continuous videos of naturalistic scenes, we're always giving it these discrete chunks of information. And, you know, we don't, well, I didn't even mention world models in this, but this is something that, you know, also is a problem where, you know, you have a world model or some sort of model that the sample is then compared to, or the sample is assembled in sort of this aggregate form and then compared to a world model.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it seems like, yeah. I mean, I love this. It's funny because I'd forgotten who the authors actually were on this.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I suppose it's a good thing that I just assumed that Josh Tenenbaum was.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I mean, I guess good for Josh, or I don't know. But you know, as a former cognitive development or developmental psychologist, you know, this is one of this is a real, you know, this is what I think of as a real data set.
Yeah.
You know, like all these Atari games and stuff. These are, you know, that's not that has no real world application. You know.
Yeah.
So I just yeah, you know, and so how you're able to take that data and then be able to do, you know, planning or the kinds of things that we're talking about that you would use a world model for. Right. You know, this is the closest that we know to how what babies do.
Yeah.
or seem to be doing. And I mean, the only thing I would add to that is the that I really like is, of course, that they're also like learning to walk like robot training. I mean, you know, as an example of you know, embodiment and again this perhaps like continual learning emphasis, where it's just like, you know, there's one thing is doing all these things
right
at the same time, right? And is probably, you know, and is utilizing that, you know. So it's yeah. I mean, I just like some of the robotic kind of the people doing robot learning with this kind of emphasis. I'm not sure I can think of like exactly the same, you know, someone who's doing it with this, you know, kind of scope or anyway, but I like it.
Yeah, so why don't we go back to the paper? This is, so they talk about data availability being a major barrier to progress in our understanding of the gap in learning efficiency between machines and humans. To make effective comparisons between human and machine learners, we need to be able to evaluate models on data comparable to what children see and hear during everyday learning experiences. So this is this multimodal data. Egocentric video recordings taken from a child's perspective provide a key window into what children both see and hear as they learn about the world around them. from their social partners. So there's a social learning aspect as well, like with the egocentric view. And then developmental psychology studies using these types of videos have together revealed that the infant view is dramatically different from that of the adult, which is citation 8, and varies as children learn to locomote on their own and interact actively with their object, places, and people around them, 11 and 12. So if you go to the 8, so reference 8 is, actually reference 7 is Linda Smith et al. Contributions of head-mounted cameras. That's the paper, the GoPro camera paper from the Journal of Cognition and Development. And then this other paper by Yoshida and Smith. What's in view for toddlers using a head camera to study visual experience. That's from infancy. And then there's this other set of papers here where this is by Kretsch, Franchak, and et al. Crawling and walking infants see the world differently. That's from Child Development. And then 12 is Long, Sanchez, Krauss, Agrawal, and Frank. Automated detections reveal social information in the changing infant view. So that's, there are a lot of methods papers in here, a lot of papers where they kind of get to this, this relationship between the egocentric view and the world and how it's explored. So this is a description of the data set. We address gaps in data availability by collecting and analyzing a new set of developmental egocentric videos, the BabyView dataset. The current paper describes the first release of the dataset, but data collection is still ongoing. Recordings were obtained using a high-resolution head-mounted camera from 6 months to 5 years, both at home and preschool settings. There's like a home view and a preschool view portions of the data set, so you have like two different social contexts and activity contexts. And you can use this accelerometer gyroscope data that can be used to estimate children's head motion. And then there's also this ego single child data set, which is using a different camera, and they describe it below. So so they have the BabyView data set and the ego single child data set. So this is the setup where you have the camera, it's the egocentric frame, 100 degrees of view. And then you have these views here, you can see. And then this is the cumulative hours of videos versus age. So this is in months. So it's largely concentrated down at about maybe 3 or 4 to 20 months, maybe 25 months. So that's pretty early in development.
Other than Josh Denenbaum, I'm glad Linda Smith is highly represented, at least in the references.
Yeah.
when you first mentioned the paper, that was I had a flash of Linda Smith, but
oh yeah.
I think that was certainly imitation learning was one of the things that I was thinking of in terms of kind of where you see robotics people doing this more. Big literature in robotics of like, watch me do this and then mimic it. That is cool.
Yeah. So,
anybody with kids knows
that's how their learning works.
That they are doing that, and then they will try and kind of try and do the same thing you're doing, even if it's in play.
This is just really a description of the data set. They don't really show a lot of interesting results. I mean, other than like how the data set is organized. Okay, so actually that brings to mind another thing that we talked about this week, or that was posted this week. And so that's in the data science ML channel. Actually, there are a number of things in here that are interesting. There's, of course, this understanding, reasoning, large language models, which we'll come back to later. And that's basically from Sebastian Roschke's Substack. There's this other archive paper. And then there are these papers on, well, actually, this one is Language Models Meets World Models and Agent Models. And this is from this year's NeurIPS, and this is like a session. Would you like to say more?
No, I was just gonna say, it's confusing because this person publishes it under their channel. You know, I like anyway. It's got good content, but unfortunately, the videos lose their metadata to some degree.
Yeah. So this video, Language Models Meets World Models, this was something that I was looking at. I was looking over the video. It seems almost like the way they approach world models is going back to cognitive science, or back to almost like the kind of models we were working with 20 or 30 years ago, where you have these conceptual models of the world, or you have these I guess internal representations of the world, and then that's kind of like they rediscovered cognitive science in a way. But it's also that a lot of times you'll look up things, like I was looking up the Chinese room problem in large language models, and it was really sparse, the number of references that I could find on that specific thing. So it really wasn't, so that's, that's a thing to consider, is that there is this obvious connection between a lot of AI models and cognitive science, and I don't know if really people have kind of exploited that niche yet. I could be wrong in that I'm not hitting the right communities, but
I've certainly, I can't remember the actual interview, but that sounds like something that's come up in like a machine learning street talk interview.
Yeah.
With someone. I forget. I think it's Tim something is the host there. Anyway, it sounds like something he might bring up. But again, I like, this is why I liked your the paper. I actually sent that to someone. The AI is I forget the title, but is a new way back to cognitive science, or a new way to study cognitive science. I think this came up. It wasn't directly the PNA. It was a conversation on social media about this kind of rediscovery of cognitive science rules, or architectures, and it was a student that I'd talked to before. She started a kind of neuroscience group and had come into the NeuroTechX community. But it was interesting because I think she was a roboticist at Georgia Tech. She was coming from that undergrad experience of being in the robotics club, and so I was super interested in terms of how robotics clubs work in general. Right? Like they are somewhat well funded by universities. They push a kind of like a lot of different. Obviously, the kind of engineering dominated, but that they can, they do bring in a kind of interdisciplinary group or multiple background group, and and you know, and again, I was particularly interested just because for a lot of students, that's a way. Being in the robotics club is a way to show off.
Yeah.
You know, and I just thought it was funny that you know, like physics majors, like a lot of these people end up going to quant finance.
Yeah.
You know, but again, that's, you know, that's great, right? Like people who know how to use differential equations and anger, sort of thing. And anyway, she had been she was just like, wow, it seems like AI is actually a great way to talk about cognitive science or to learn about cognitive science. So I'd sent that paper that you posted, as well as the that Stanford paper with McClellan, the PNAS Nexus paper.
Yeah.
You remember that? What were they doing? But they were doing like humans on a task. They did kind of like a Mechanical Turk,
right?
Rating something. Anyway, they were testing humans and they were testing LLMs on the same tasks, and finding where you know your cognitive kind of inductive biases led you astray. Oh, that's right. They were changing they were changing the content of complex sentences into like nonsense, using nonsense words versus right. And yeah, it can be right. I mean, again, it's like as long as you're not giving LLMs theory of mind tests, having them do well, and then deciding that they're alive.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and so I forget. I don't know what that arXiv paper was, but I don't think it was this. But I did post a paper, or it was like a Substack or something. A post about just LLMs. LLMs use this, or you know, fall into the same category as the what's the person who's like the mentalist tricks. So like I can predict what you're thinking, kind of things. It's like you fall into the same traps when a person's trying to trick you.
Yeah.
And they were just trying to get at the point that that it is an easy. It's kind of like an easy self trap when you're interacting with the LLMs. That I again is the only danger with this. You know, using them for cognitive science.
Right. Yeah. All right. So yeah, that was the language models meets world models. And so I think there's a lot to say about like world models and like maybe language models or world models in general and what exactly they are. In that video, they kind of give it a very cognitive science cast. Like basically it's, instead of just, you know, having all these data and then looking at like the sampling rate or the sampling efficiency, you have these models, that internal models to the agent, that are used to sort of get these out of distribution answers. So it's not just the data coming in and you're not inferring from the data so much. It's that you have this model that you operate on, and then the data has to fit the model. And of course, you run the risk of just kind of having a bad model or an incomplete model, that sometimes if you get data that doesn't fit into the model, then the agent is flummoxed and the performance suffers. So, I think there's like something to be said about world models being these internal models of cognition, these overarching models of like the world. But then there's also this aspect of, how do you acquire something like this? You can, of course, engineer something top down, but then, what is it that maybe you extract things from, or maybe the agent extract things from the world that isn't known to the top down implementer of the model. That is, you might have something in the world in some video that's captured that you don't see, or there's a set of relationships that aren't apparent to the person creating the representation and then putting it in the agent. You're talking about artificial systems. So it's one of these things where I think there's this out of distribution aspect to world models. In any case, then I think Morgan added a few more links here. There's the how large language models conquered the ARC Prize. What was that? Oh, that was the machine learning street talk.
Yeah, I mean, as well as this recent emphasis on smaller models can do better.
Yeah.
And so this DeepSeek craze, if you will, that has set off a bunch of related papers from different groups. But yeah, like our ARC Prize being a great example of, in a sense, cognitive science becoming a greater emphasis, or certainly thinking about what your intelligence test is is testing, and so yeah, super interesting, as well as what other benchmarks that because like ARC Prize was kind of unique at when Chalet came out with it, but I think DeepSeek and getting to DeepSeek has actually created a number of other benchmarks that are growing that space, or being although interestingly, but not surprisingly, it's still super math focused.
Oh yeah, definitely. So we have this paper here, this arXiv paper, which is automated capability discovery via model self-exploration. That's a paper of Jeff Clune on it.
It still seems like the same people are doing all the heavy lifting.
Yeah.
But great stuff, and again, like emphasizing this I mean, I don't want to give them like DeepSeek all the credit here, because I think I've been rewatching a bunch of old like DeepMind videos, but just this discovery, if you will, that we should stop trying to think we know how this works.
Yeah.
we should let the models figure it out.
Yeah.
With these reinforcement learning, self-learning kind of strategies, and that it's I loved I you know, watching too many videos, but it's just like I think it was, I can't remember who it was talking about this. I think maybe it was David Silver, but they were just saying, he was saying that if you visualize AlphaFold's kind of progress, just how unnatural it is to the people who were doing protein folding research before that.
Yeah.
And and yet in hindsight, how important they thought it was that it was doing all these unnatural things.
Yeah.
For the protein's overall stability at the end, which is, you know, again, it's one of these things where it's just like somehow the models can see the forest and not get caught up in the trees, you know, yeah, without seeing the forest.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know if the metaphor helps at all, but it was interesting. It was interesting. Yeah. So, and then I dropped a couple researchers' profiles in who, yeah. So, Kong Lu is. Let me just remember here. Okay, yeah. So he's Jeff Glynn's student, but it's interesting to see where he's coming from and what, you know, you know, like look, he was at Sakana, for instance.
Yeah.
You know, again, and you know, it's like where are the places that he's been, and what are the, you know, what are kind of like the iClear workshops that he's attending.
Yeah.
So like you know, he's got some really interesting stuff, and obviously some you know, GitHub repos and papers, and then Logan's the next one. Yeah, Logan. So, and what's cool is that Logan's Logan I met as a part of Neuromatch.
Okay.
Like, and it was Neuromatch in its pure Neuromatch form. in that, like, it was just a, like, let's put 8 random people in a Zoom.
Okay.
And and have them introduce themselves.
Yeah.
But you know, he was describing his work, and I was like, oh, you know, that sounds like you're, you know, world modeling.
Right.
And he was, you know, he said, yeah, exactly. And you know, this was pre these top 2 papers. So anyway, I was, you know, he would be someone I think I'd love to have come and talk, you know. See, it could, like, I don't believe there's any recordings of him talking about his work.
Oh yeah, that would be great. Yeah.
You know, but I really like this agent world modeling benchmark.
Yeah.
You know, obviously.
Yeah, of course.
And then, you know, that he might be doing theory of mind without talking about, you know, them being conscious.
Right.
But a nice merger, yeah, of kind of cognitive science of AI, you know.
Yeah. A lot of, well, yeah, cognitive science, You have some good neuroscience papers here too.
Absolutely. I think he's coming from or certainly he seems to be postdoc in a lab which is very Neuro-AI focused.
Yeah.
So they're definitely thinking about, neuroscience. But I was particularly taken by the kind of cognitive science of his AI work.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's great. Thanks for that. Okay. Let's see. So that's data science ML, and then we had some things in dev Neuro-AI that we had. This is the post on where Morgan linked to this Neuro-AI lab at Stanford, and that's where they have the BabyView dataset paper.
Is that that is?
Yeah, I think that's what it is. It's this lab here.
Well, so because I think, that's super interesting. But I think this is Neuro-AI lab. I think is Logan's current lab.
Oh, okay. Well, that'd be great. Yeah.
I think it might be Dan.
Yeah, it is. Okay, there he is.
Yeah, I was just particularly I looked at, so I was like, okay, so given his background, what's the lab that he's moved to?
Yeah.
And go to the research tab there. But now you're right. I see BabyView there.
Yeah.
But when I look at these kind of research goals, they don't really make me think like this is these are interesting directions.
Yeah.
I mean, you know what I mean? Like these sounds like neuroscience goals.
Right. Well,
very,
yeah,
very
I'm sure
traditional neuroscience goals. Although the last being, where it seems like they're actually doing all the real play.
Yeah.
But I think it also speaks to just how many people are on that BabyView paper, and I forget. I mean, I want to say Michael Frankson is. I would bet that he's got a lot of appointments.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the, and then this is.
So this is the guy at Stability AI.
Okay.
Who was brought on as Stability AI, one of the kind of pioneering, what do we want to call it? Diffusion model, generative model.
Yeah.
Companies, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like before ChatGPT, there was, this image generator, I guess is what they were known for.
Yeah.
Right. And so the interesting thing was that this guy came on to Stability as officially their head of neuroimaging.
Okay.
I forget exactly what his title was, but it was something like that. And he ran, and I guess still runs, a Discord group. I don't know if I'm going to be able to find it right now. Is it? Sorry, I just checked MedArc and I just found Hussein.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's MedArc. is the group, and oh yeah, sorry, it's right there, right? So MedArc's the third of these groups, but it was there that they did they've got some papers out. It's kind of like a self-organized community of researchers and neuroscientists, where they came together to work on various simulations as well as data analysis, and one of those being I think it's called Mind's Eye, which was very much a here's a data set of a person looking at pictures or movies or something like that, and us restoring what the movie was from the brain activity.
Oh yeah, I've heard of this. Yeah,
right. So I actually posted this across a number of other groups too, just because well, like Celsius and Neurotech X, like I would certainly hope we could achieve the same kinds of we have a lot of same goals,
right?
And and again, he really did have a unique perspective on working with open science communities.
Okay, yeah.
Although he seems to have left stability. Yeah. And just like, I don't think it needs to be. I mean, stability had a whole bunch of issues.
Oh yeah, that's what I understand. Yeah.
And unlike OpenAI, it's I don't know what its current status is, but I assume it's been contracting.
Yeah.
And I know that its founder, where did he? I mean, he moved to Microsoft. Anyway, I mean, the drama of all of these big, so-called AI. I don't know what the right term is. Innovators. That doesn't sound right. These corporate AI people, like, it's not really important, but it is interesting. Like there's a bunch of people, a bunch of interesting people went through Stability AI because it had so much money and it was bringing in so many people, right? So the David Hough was brought in as a very important person at Stability, for instance. I think he left within like a year or something.
Right. Okay, so back to the Dev Neuro-AI channel. This is the software crisis.
Yeah.
So what is this?
This is what I was talking about in terms of, this is my issue with how to categorize these papers, which is my own personal Slack issue.
Yeah, I know.
Again, like, all of these should really be in a doc with tags so that they can be in multiple without it feeling like you're filling up a bunch of them. Anyway, but this is what I was talking about in terms of LLMs replicate the psychics con.
Okay.
And that this is so often what people are falling into, or when they seem to be doing something, quote, surprising to someone,
right.
It's as this author, I think, points out, you should think of this as a great teaching tool about how psychics grift.
Yeah.
not about how amazing LLMs are.
Yeah. So there's a lesson to be learned here. It's just not the lesson we want to learn, I guess.
Yeah.
Or,
Yeah.
and then this is a post from LinkedIn on the test optimized brain and how mouse and primate visual cortex are unified by the same SSL objective. I don't know what that means.
Let me. I'll try and extract the.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. So this is a lecture that is on representation and generation in neuroscience and AI. And let me. I can give you. I'll just put it in the. I'll put a link to this box here. So it's actually a PDF. But it seemed like a nice, a nice kind of review of the how kind of neural data and neural processing are kind of you see the same things in neural networks and neural architectures.
Okay.
Neural network architectures. Yeah.
So let's see if they have.
No.
This is categorization performance versus IT explained variance. Is there an underlying principle? This is from Yamins and Hough in 2014 PNAS. This is showing kind of like these different networks, model architectures where the deeper networks sort of go out in this circle.
Yeah. And by the way, this is again the same guy. This is Neuro-AI lab.
And then so you formulate comprehensive model classes, choose challenging ethologically valid tasks. So word recognition, localization, categorization are in this space. So you have the CNNs and sort of the space that they inhabit. And then you have these different types of tasks within that space. And then implement generic learning rules or gradient descent. So you're converging upon different types of tasks, or different types of tasks you converge upon a space in this. And so I guess that means that like there's certain models that are optimized for these things, like for different tasks or.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this does, and this is remarkably Neuro-AI, right?
Yeah.
It's like, so when you put it together with those other papers, it's just like, oh yeah, like this is exactly what I think you would have been working on.
Yeah.
As opposed to these other cool things that you're also doing too, which is good.
Yeah. So this is exactly what you're saying, where then these different models or these different parts of the space map to different parts of the brain or different streams. So this localization, sort of the convergence to localization in the space of architecture classes maps to the ventral stream in the visual system. So like these parts of the brain are specialized for this thing. And then that's like consistent with a model architecture that is convergent for the sort of localization task. So you can do localization, you converge upon this type of model, basically.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's cool, right?
Yeah, it is. It is.
Yeah.
It's definitely a way of thinking. I guess when they say architecture classes, they mean like different configurations of an architecture or different weights, or what are they? I guess maybe the networks get deeper as you go out in the sphere or in the circle. So like these architecture classes are sort of categorized by their depth. And
So it's certainly it's a dimension.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's I would want to dig in more. I just thought it was again, these are kind of just things I stumble across.
Yeah, I know. This is good.
And it makes me want to go and see what this whole lecture series is.
Yeah. Yeah, this is definitely interesting. Yeah,
because it would be nice, again, like Neuro-AI is not well defined.
Right.
The Patrick Minot paper that covers Neuro-AI, although I think he says for AI safety or something like that.
Right.
He shows you how many different things you could actually be talking about.
Oh yeah.
Whereas this seems like a really well-grounded neuroscience way of and that I think is actually really useful. In terms of organizing and motivating neuroscience research.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this, and then if we go down more, you can actually get kind of these sort of, you can figure out the gradient descent rules for this, and then the loss function, the dataset, and the architecture class, and then so that's interesting.
As well as I like it in terms of kind of cognitive science ideas too.
Yeah.
Right. Thinking about just thinking about categorization that way. Is certainly again, like I could dig around and find some old cognitive science where it's looking very much like they're using that kind of metaphor.
Yeah.
With very different data, basically with behavioral data. and so I love the overlap with just with the cognitive science and Neuro-AI, and Logan seems to have taken all of these threads and made a wonderful video game agent that's embodying all of this.
Oh yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, that'd definitely be nice to hear from him.
Yeah. So I just thought, if I give it, and if I say hey, in March, it would be great if you could come and give a talk that we could record.
Yeah.
Would he be down for that? Right.
That'd be good. Yeah. Let's figure the logistics of that out.
Yeah. And again, I love the fact that the only reason I know this person is because of NeuroMatch.
Right. So and then there's this other link, Han AI.
So remind me what that.
That is William Hahn, PhD. Looks like.
Yeah. So
different types of.
Yeah, I definitely love the artificial immune systems.
Yeah.
I think, again, I think I kind of use Dev Neuro-AI as a catch-all for something that's super multidisciplinary.
Yeah.
And I just don't know what else to do with it.
Well, I think we should think broadly about Neuro-AI, or what we're doing in our flavor of it. So I absolutely think, like artificial immune systems kind of fit into that because we're just interested in all manner of like development and like how to build agents that are biologically inspired.
And James Glazier, speaking of, exactly along these lines. Let me like actually just grab this because it is so perfect. If I think I reposted it. Yeah, here it is. So current research in toxicology. And I'm just going to put this, I'll put it in Neuro-AI, Neuro-AI again.
Yeah.
I'm not going to install Box. Okay, sorry, Slack's asking me. I know. Well, I mean, anyway, there you
go. Okay.
Just a cool, yeah. It's. I love that it's coming. I love that it's in toxicology.
Right.
But they, it's a wonderful multidisciplinary work that is what you would expect from development.
Right.
Yeah. And so I really want to pass this on to Thomas Harding because he's the organoid intelligence guy, right? But that's totally not his field in the sense that he's a toxicologist. and if anything, he so can we link organoids together with this kind of in silico modeling more?
Yeah. So this is something that models neural tube closure defects, and so this is where they develop a dynamic system agent-based model of neural tube closure. This is in mammalian systems, so they're using cell signaling and biomechanics, and we've talked about some of those type of models in DevoWorm, and how we can use those. We can look at the biomechanics, the cell signaling, and then other things on top of that. Predict both the nature and probability of defects from genetic perturbations. The model aligns with biological phenotypes, which we observe in existing research. And then there's this sort of assessment of developmental toxicity. That's probably they had to put that in to get into the journal.
But it's getting, yeah.
Oh, this is a better figure here. Okay, so this is where they have this sort of characterization of the embryo, and they have this surface ectoderm, neural crest, neuroectoderm. So they've defined the tissues down here. They have from T0 hours to 50 hours, and they're looking at these different things that are being expressed. So, and they show kind of where these things are being expressed. You see this again here so this is for Sonic Hedgehog, PTCH, GOI, BMP4, BMPR, Noggin, and Zik. And then this is Wnt, FZD, PAX, and SNAI. So this is kind of showing these different things here. Yeah, this is a nice paper. Looks like they've characterized this, and then this is their gene regulatory network for these genes that they're looking at. So, it's just kind of hard to see the the elements, but you basically have these different components: neural crest, surface ectoderm, and so forth. And then in this, so they have more of that. I'm looking maybe for an output of the model, but I don't see it.
Oh,
and then they have equations in here that. So it's basically a gene regulatory network, and then they have some outputs.
Yeah, I mean it's it's exactly what you'd expect from a kind of James Glazier group, great James Glazier associated group, and but I love that this is one of the kind of the major milestones in embryo development, right? So it's got this it's a great start, and there's not enough of certainly agent-based models that are that focused on kind of brain development.
Yeah, I think that's nice that there's this agent-based model that fits into sort of a gene regulatory network.
Right. So anyway, this came up in the context of artificial immune systems.
Right.
and I thought there was I misremembered in my head that there was actually more of an immune story there.
Okay.
And maybe there is in the anyway, but it doesn't look like it. But Hans' work is interesting in that regard.
Yeah.
And James Glazier runs a what's it called? It's like IMGRIP or something. It's like a completely nonsense acronym. Thursdays, unfortunately, I got a meeting at the same time. There's 2 meetings. There's 2 or 3 meetings all at noon on Thursday, my time.
Yeah.
And James Glazier is one of them, and they focus on immune systems. I think I'm misremembering with like his speaker this week for that. It was immune system focused.
Yeah.
Digital twin stuff.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But like immune system. I think immunity is the weekly meetings theme.
Yeah.
Because I think it started as a pandemic focus, like it might even be viral epidemiology.
Okay.
Anyway.
Yeah. It looks like Sarrah's here. Hello, Sarrah. So why don't we move on to another set of papers here. I wanted to talk about this one here. We've been talking about cognitive science and Neuro-AI. This is actually a topics in cognitive science paper on team cognition research and how that's transforming cognitive science. So this is Michael Spivey from UC Merced on this paper. And this is a topics in cognitive science paper. This is part of this series on the dynamical hypothesis and thinking about like the sort of the legacy of it. So the dynamical hypothesis is where we're thinking about the brain as a complex system and how that differs from some of the other ways in which we've characterized the brain, as opposed to, say, something like a computer. And so Luis Favela and Vicente Raja are topic editors. Vicente Raja, of course, is we've talked about some of his work in, I think it's either the cybernetics group or the cognition futures group. And then Luis Favela has done a lot of work on dynamical cognition as well. So this is Michael J. Spivey. And so this is, so there is Tim Van Gelder, who was a connectionist, who was also a philosopher. So this is connectionism. This is back in the 1990s when he was publishing some of his landmark works on dynamical cognitive science. So he says, Tim Van Gelder, a connectionism-trained philosopher with the leeway to enjoy a 30,000-foot view of science, was perhaps in a special position to make his contribution of the dynamical hypothesis in cognitive science just before the turn of the last century. And that's kind of an interesting way to put the 1990s. But this special issue commemorates that clarion call he made almost 30 years ago. His behavioral and brain sciences paper, his journal philosophy paper, and his edited volume with Robert Port. So the Port and Van Gelder paper, Mind is Motion, or it's actually an edited volume, from 1995, were inspirational for many of us. Together, they've been cited more than a few thousand times. For some, that inspiration could manifest as simply shifting away from digital computation and towards a unique form of neural computation as what constitutes cognition. So this is where, we think of the computer, or we think of the brain as a computer, and we think about digital computation. And, we did a whole series on this in 2022 and 2023, where we talked about computation in the brain, physical computation, and some of the other aspects of that analogy. And so people have really kind of, a lot of people in AI have drilled down on this idea of the brain being digital computation. And of course, there are other forms of computation, such as physical computation, and indeed neural computation is defined in the neural computation literature. And so what they're arguing here is that there's this sort of digital computation where you make that analogy explicit with all of the sort of the problems that it sort of brings with it, or you think of it as a form of computation that is unique to the brain. And so this is, of course, Piccinini is one of the people who talks about this. We talked about his work on physical computation as well. So this is one aspect. For others, it could trigger a transition to a dynamical systems approach that changes nonlinear trajectories in linguistic state space. So this is the Elman paper from 2009. So again, there are different ways you can think about the brain as like something that is computational, but not digitally computational. You also have this aspect of dynamical systems where you think about like these trajectories being produced. And, we could do this for linguistics, we could do this for vision, we could do this for other areas. Still, for others, it could transport one all the way to a complex systems approach that allows multiple organisms to engage in one shared cognition, and that's Spivey's work. This brief commentary focuses on the special issue articles of McEwen, Magalindo, Lansfair, Amazine, and Van Eynhoven, Wiltshire, Helges, and Gevers. So this is kind of talking about the special issue and kind of talking about some of these aspects. Rather than comment on them one at a time like a serial processing sequentialist might do, I will instead try to address the two articles in interwoven fashion. So these two articles already dovetail each other. The groundbreaking team cognition work of Jamie Gorman naturally figures prominently in both. And so talking about the performance of teams and the shared cognition that emerges among them cannot be fully understood without embracing a dynamical systems perspective and placing a focus on the coordination dynamics of multiple interconnected subcomponents of the system. So coordination dynamics refers to the sort of dynamical systems approach to coordinating different parts of the brain, or it could be coordinating different people with brains doing things. And so it has a sort of multi-scale aspect to it. In order to account for their observed phenomena, these fields were forced to take on dynamical systems accounts, where the important phenomena can only be explained as resulting from interdependent nonlinear interactions among multiple factors. There is a lesson in there for cognitive scientists. Allow me to be a little more pointed with that observation. It is possible that we, as cognitive scientists, should be slightly embarrassed that our field has taken so long to catch up to those dynamical systems insights. So just kind of going through, because dynamical systems, of course, has been around for quite a while, and it's still not really in the mainstream of cognitive science or neuroscience. So thinking about how that fits into what people are doing, the kinds of questions that are asked, and so forth. And so this kind of goes through some aspects of how sort of dynamical systems fits into cognitive science. It's really interesting that some of this is, in this paper, is kind of like, almost like it reads kind of like a stream of consciousness sort of thing. And so it just talks about some of the ways people have applied dynamical systems analysis. So I guess, let's see if I can find a good example of what they're talking about here. So they talk about data analysis and data collection and how one might use that as a way to, or use dynamical systems analysis to gain insight from the data. So here's a piece here. Together, Nguyen and Eindhoven, these two papers that he's talking about in the special issue, are using these multiple densely sampled measures as part of how they call for a broader conception of what we refer to as a cognitive agent. Crucially, it need not be a singular organism bounded by its skin. It could be two or more of them temporarily functioning as one cognitive agent. For this, allow me to draw another analogy. Beer analyzes the statistical patterns of gliders in the game of life. This is Randall Beer. He's done a lot of things on artificial life, looking at these gliders, which are these sort of epiphenomenal agents in the game of life, and finds that while these arrowhead-shaped emergent patterns appear independent and self-motivated as they propagate across the lattice, they are in fact ritually interdependent with their surroundings in the grid. His analysis shows that this complex interdependence makes it difficult to treat the glider as if it were a singular autonomous cognitive agent all by itself. Is it possible the same is true of people when they engage in team cognition? So he's kind of considering dynamical systems approaches to cognition, both in the context of how that kind of reinterprets cognitive science, but also thinking about this in terms of team cognition and sort of the situatedness that you have that kind of emerges from this kind of analysis. So this is talking about ecological validity, and kind of giving that is sort of this embeddedness of sort of this ecological validity, meaning that it makes your experiments or your analysis sort of more ecologically sound, that the sort of the setting of the experiment or the setting of the observation is more embedded in a sort of a real environment. And so this is interesting, an interesting point for AI experiments, that we don't really have a good fix on what constitutes ecological validity. That is, if we talk about intelligence, is there an ecologically valid way to talk about, artificial intelligence or agent-based intelligence? So this part here, by employing more ecologically valid shared tasks, such as unscripted interactive conversation, open-ended joint tasks, and coordination during gameplay, the field of cognitive science is better able to apply its findings to the real world. What is more, some of the bedrock findings in cognitive science melt away when the task becomes more ecologically valid. For example, rather than treating language use as a discrete turn-taking process, where, at each turn, a message is delivered by a sender and acquired by a receiver, real-world language is being better understood as a complex process involving interruptions, overlapping speech, and riddled with errors, misunderstandings, and multiple methods of interactive repair. So in this case, he's explicitly sort of taking on the information theoretic view of Shannon and Weaver, this idea that you have basically the basis of information theory, which is that you have this channel where there's a sender and a receiver, and an information channel that has discrete messages in it, and you can make this characterization of the message. So that's very much the basis for the cybernetic view of cognition, where you have this communication channel that is open and you can analyze it. And so what he's arguing is that in this sort of more ecologically valid approach, you have this sort of complex process where you have all these attributes of speech that are not, kind of idealized. And he kind of talks about some of these. And this is Dingemans and Enfield 2023. So there's this view of, these two competing views of analyzing language. You have the information theoretic view of language, the cybernetic view of cognition, and then you have this other view. And I guess this is supposed to be a dynamical view, but that's just kind of this foil comparison. And I think it's interesting in the context of, how we analyze AI agents, how we analyze this difference between biological agents and artificial agents, and having these kind of distinctions of what, how we actually analyze these behaviors and how we build our models. So Brown, Schmidt, and Tannenhaus in 2008 found that this interactive co-creation of common ground developed over the course of natural and scripted bidirectional conversation between two people was often sufficient to eliminate some of the temporary ambiguity effects in word recognition and syntactic processing that had been observed in the scripted unidirectional language comprehension circumstances. So I guess what all this means is that it's like it just resolves some of the problems, some of the things that are lacking from the information theoretic view. So yeah, in dynamical systems, you kind of get away from these discrete symbolic computational approaches, and you kind of think about, more what's going on in the brain. And yeah, so you can, in biological cognitive agents, you cannot instantly teleport from one representation to the next, the way a digital computer basically does. Their cognitive trajectories have to spend some time traveling through the continuous state space in between these symbol-like regions. So this is, again, where you have, instead of having these discrete states and discrete representations that you can switch back and forth between, you have to have this sort of trajectory that goes between representations. So you have maybe representation A and representation B, and then you have this path between them. So there's this transition between A and B, and it's continuous. And of course you're analyzing behavior in the brain in a continuous way. So that makes sense that you have this sort of, and it's not, a continual, I guess it could be linked to continual learning, but it's this idea of, these discrete measurements and these discrete models versus continuous models and continuous measures. So this is one thing that Van Gelder has bestowed upon the field, an emphasis on studying the continuous temporal dynamics of cognition. So this is, again, just this idea of continuous dynamics, and this is like, the idea of like naturalistic data sets and other types of things that aren't discrete. And so, you can really kind of contrast this with the cybernetics view and how they kind of approach intelligence and cognition and communication. One interesting thing I haven't seen, of course, is this maybe, kind of uniting explicitly cybernetic approaches and cybernetic views with this dynamical systems view. And I mean, this paper kind of makes, and a lot of papers I've seen kind of make this distinction between dynamical systems approaches and cybernetic approaches, but I'm wondering if that distinction is more just kind of like drawn out because, it's this academic artifact of, well, there's this difference between the two things and we'd like to have our own field and we, don't really like the cybernetic view and, this sort of, the people will do this to make their own sort of way in academic space. But like, what are the commonalities between the cybernetic view and the dynamical view? I'm just kind of interested in, what that would look like. Of course, this is not something that was new to the 1990s, and Van Gelder didn't invent all this. This is something that, of course, if we look at the intellectual background for this. And I think I reviewed this in a Cognition Futures meeting a long time ago. But a lot of the sort of the dynamical systems view of cognition comes from ecological psychology. And J.J. Gibson's work in the 70s and earlier, and then Michael Turvey's work a little bit later, and J.S. Kelso's work, Thielman and Smith's work in the 90s, and then of course Randall Beer was doing a lot of this with robotic agents. And so this has a very rich history in ecological psychology, and this view that you have to look at agents as these interacting continuously with the world. You can't just use these kind of discrete approaches and these kind of experimental, building your experiments on these discrete approaches, I guess is a better way to put it. And so the ecological view opens up a lot of possibilities. And of course, the ecological psychologists are naturally attracted to dynamical systems. And so Van Gelder was really the person who sort of proposed the dynamical hypothesis, but there are these other intellectual precursors to this. So I know that paper was a little bit I didn't go through the paper maybe as intended the way it was written, but I think it brings up a lot of important points in that space of cybernetic cognition versus maybe dynamical cognition.
I mean, a lot of the examples that I think motivated it really were early were motor.
Yeah. That's the easiest way I think to study it, actually.
And of course it's like, well, how else could that be?
Yeah.
Right? Because I think so it's like motor, but also nonlinear analysis of motor.
Yeah.
Because like detrended fluctuation analysis and
right.
I think our QA. I want to say I know what that is.
Well, I think the point is that you're collecting continuous data, and you have to have some way to analyze it. And there, of course, are different challenges to that kind of time series. Like, you have to get rid of the noise. You have to figure out how to make a statement about what's going on. That's because we use discrete language to describe epochs or things like that. And so, how do you extract that from the time series?
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly a great, not emphasis, but it's a reminder that what you're looking at it can potentially severely restrict your thinking about it and modeling, right? How much of cognitive science was built on decision processes before that?
Yeah.
and how much, because this is something that Carl Prieman certainly talked about, was how much changed when technology became available to start recording continuous things, because I think he mentions EEG and eye tracking. I want to kind of separate out motion, it is, eye tracking is super interesting, right? Because it's you can record the kind of the brain areas that are controlling your eye movements. and it's fascinating, you know, like you don't scan a painting like a digitizer, you know what I mean? Right. So there are cluster points on that, and like just face processing and paintings,
Right.
painting evaluation, like they were discussing, like two people discussing a painting, and how much is their eye movements coordinated because of the conversation, and how much is it coordinated because people have these nonlinear attractors in the painting.
Yeah.
Or like somehow the painting creates these attractors, for your eye movements.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's a fascinating area. I'm just reminded on how difficult team-based analysis is, and how easy it is to find coordination, or find synchronization,
right?
But impute it to the wrong source or cause.
Yeah.
And like I'm very open to this kind of work, but I've seen a lot of hyperscanning.
Yeah.
I love Guillaume Dumas' work in psychiatry. He's up at University of Montreal. Doing like high density recordings, EEG recordings to people.
Yeah.
Yeah, like how much of that is ecology? How much of that is that you're dealing with two similar complex systems?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's what was there was an interesting discussion. Who had this? Robert Spolsky.
Okay.
He does these YouTube videos with his daughter. I don't know if you've seen these,
No,
but they're called father offspring interviews.
Oh. I think I've heard of it, but I have not watched it.
Yeah, it's hysterical, right? So his daughter is just asking him questions. Although I didn't get to see behind the curtain, so to speak, because so this is their 50th one. I really had assumed that she just read him cold these questions from the internet, and that he, being Robert Spolsky, could just talk about whatever at length, with references, right? Which Carl Friston can totally do. Yeah. like he does in his meetings. And anyway, the question was, why do congenitally blind people develop schizophrenia?
Okay.
And he had this great discussion about it, which was, of course, getting at, when two things are rare, how likely is it that they will be together?
Yeah.
And so he had this wonderful example that he talked about in terms of, they got like 500,000 people in Australia to participate in this thing, and it was just like 11,000 of them developed schizophrenia, and I think 60 some were congenitally blind. Okay. And so the answer, it was funny because no congenitally blind were found to develop schizophrenia. And he said, but the statistical likelihood was 0.6 people. So he was just like 0 or 1.
Right.
But the main thing being, that sometimes the data is not even enough, or that the data gives you an answer, but you should actually wait. Because he was giving the 2 examples of just like, what if we'd had 1,
Yeah.
It would say that these are occurring more than they should.
Right. So, like, given that it's a rare event, you have this,
it's a rare event.
Still have this association. Right.
So, and what I wanted to do was like extend that to dynamical systems, or kind of continuous data.
Yeah.
Right. Like it's potentially easy to find things, and also not necessarily informative.
Yeah.
But yeah, just that kind of work is really, at least at Virginia Tech, the people that are doing the hyperscanning, what I kind of like is they are very specific about the tasks that they're giving them. So they're engaging in these kind of economic tasks. And I think that's useful in terms of trying to, again, like make some of the results more kind of interpretable. Although, I think the examples that they have of real-time continuous, a conversation between 2 people being 2 continuous tasks that people are engaging and overlapping and things like that, it is much more real world and is how conversations actually happen. And like we have all these error correcting processes, just like biology does.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting set of observations there. I'm just making some notes here. Yeah, so why don't we check the chat? I think there were okay. Oh yeah. Okay, yeah, Sarrah, what's going on? Did you have an update for us, or just seeing what's going on here?
You're unmuted, but we don't hear you.
Yeah. Hi.
There you go. Yeah.
Hi. Yeah, so no, mostly just dropped in to see what's happening. Like I missed the last couple of meetings, I think.
Yeah.
I was on vacation, so I'm just back in town. So just popped in to see what was happening.
Yeah. Well,
good deal.
Yeah. Nice to have you.
I wanted to, I've been diving into LLM engineering to some degree, and wanted to get any recommendations that you had in terms of multi-agent, multi-agent coding, multi-agent code developers, and thinking to your project, and just if there were any particular approaches or projects that you might recommend, maybe you didn't get a chance to work with, but you thought would be interesting. Just wondering where there might be you might have some of those references.
Yeah, sure. I did actually, I remember compiling like a list of these. So I'll go through them and I'll send it on the chat. So I don't have them like on this laptop right now.
Sure.
But
Sure.
yeah.
Sure. That'd be great.
Yeah, so mostly in my experience when I was researching into that, what I noticed was mostly you like try to have some sort of open source framework for the like, especially for the part where the agents communicate with each other. Like coding that from scratch can be very so like in the project that I did here, that is kind of what I did. Like I made it from scratch. But then there are a lot of frameworks that allow you to do that part. So you only focus on programming each agent individually, and then the communication part is quite easily done. So I'll send over the list of this.
Please. I'd love to. I'm really curious about the multi-agent examples, or like since we're coming off of a paper about teams. How just wondering about how potentially limiting it is to have a single code agent versus having a team, if you will, especially for good code, or again, I dropped some links into DataSci ML from this guy Simon Williams. It's not Williams. It's something Willison. Okay. Anyway, he's the co-creator of Django, and was definitely seems to be doing the talk circuit. Yeah. I was going to say talk show circuit, but no, talk circuit of podcasts and conferences, saying code agents, LLMs can be a good code generator. Okay. Yeah. But I liked his emphasis on, I liked his pragmatism and his realism. Yeah. and I like that he's not. I like that he's first and foremost a guy who wants to support creators and writers. Okay. Yeah. Like that. That's his main goal. That's why he started Django. He was like the developer for some small Kansas newspaper or something like that. Oh yeah. And like he's made his fortune, and now he's back just doing this kind of thing, and it just seems like so much of what you really want is what comes from a build sprint that's going well is one where you've got a bunch of team members that are able to, complement and, catch errors or things that you're not thinking of, or build in needed hooks for something else that somebody else is going to use it for later, or all of those kinds of things. That would seem best coming from a multi-agent, coming with a multi-agent scenario. But
that would definitely be an interesting thing to look into, especially with a lot of the work that Sarrah did last summer with.
Right.
Kind of we have like a very controlled system where we have an open source project, and then like agents doing the open source project.
Yeah.
One agent is creating project and then opening issues and then closing issues, and
so like again, like thinking about both the Spivak as well as the Logan Cross, just the multi agent being a great example of where you have a theory of mind of what the other agents are doing, or you would probably be developing one,
right?
And so just links to a bunch of those things, as well as being this, with our perhaps idealistic goal of at what point will LLMs be can they even be something that actually aids scientific research, or like coding is not scientific research, but coding, and certainly coding in a much larger context, again, like I've just been thinking about how to potentially do a refactor of a code base that I knew worked like 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so to some degree, it's like it's self-consistent. Like I can't necessarily dump it on a new OS and run it without its dependencies and things like that. But how much is there for a software writing agent to learn from that, and how much, just what are the limits of these new software agents? Because it is obviously going to be one of the first targets, right? It's like we can talk about all the jobs and all the hype about AI, but obviously the first one's going to be, can the agent write code?
Right, and do it effectively in a team.
And do it effectively, and be what's the human agent interaction, and how to manage that, and all of those things, as well as all of the things that went in, that were real factors for Sarah's projects in terms of software sustainability, or and community too. The important thing, community, that I see in community building is, of course, how to bring in new people, get them up to speed, and get them also contributing as opposed to just learning.
So these two that I talked in the chat, I've talked about both of those, I think, earlier as well. But at the time that I had done my research, I'm sure there are much more now as well. But at the time that I had done my research, these two were the main proper frameworks that would they both have papers in which they have a lot of this supporting research as well for why these agents work good in teams, and what is metrics as best as they could measure of how effective they are in teams versus when the same task is done with a single GPT agent or something.
Yeah.
And like they're both frameworks that allow you to do like your own experiments. Like you install the framework and everything, and then you can just program each agent individually and kind of do your own thing. AgentVerse, I think I've personally tried. MetaGPT, I haven't, but I've like read about it and seen the videos and stuff. Yeah. So these are both definitely there. But like all of my research was, I think, like quite like 6-8 months back. So there may definitely be like better, newer frameworks and stuff. And like one thing that I personally wanted to use was LangChain, which also has this very good like the whole thing is it has this chain of how the information flows, which makes it very easy to communicate between agents. So like a lot of people use LangChain for multi-agent framework development as well.
Yeah, so this is where I think it's interesting, because I would say that the big update since last year, right?
Yeah.
It's been the emphasis on reasoning models, right?
Yeah.
And and there's a lot of details about that, but again, it's this everybody's trying to make a reasoner. But to your point about like LangChain's older, but this is multi-agent, and it certainly I'm just I'm laughing at deep wisdom is the MetaGPT's company. Deep wisdom AI. It's I guess nobody's willing to take deep thought.
No, Deep Thoughts by Jack Candy. Yes.
Yeah, well, it's like you can't have a direct Douglas Adams reference.
Yeah.
But yeah, but it's super interesting. Like I'd love to yeah, and we've got your presentation on YouTube, right?
Yeah,
Sarrah?
there's her presentation.
Yeah. I should go back over that, and but it's certainly looking at Deep Wisdom's webpage. I can see that that's exactly what they're going for in terms of the what I was thinking about multi-agent. See that?
Yeah.
And
It's a framework for basically what you're talking
yeah.
about. Although,
yeah.
Is it open source or is it? No,
well, it makes me think that like they open source, they open source something.
Yeah, but it's not all.
And then they got VC money.
Right, exactly.
Because I remember, like the first time I'd come across this, I do not remember seeing this domain. So
no. I'm sure. I mean.
Yeah, so I'm sure this is a later update.
this is so Silicon Valley, right? It's like, and this all happened like within a year. Right?
Yeah.
Like because the first time I had seen this, it looked like a group of like college students got together and made it.
Totally.
And now it's suddenly a company.
Totally. I mean, this is the. We have this big, I mean, it's just a running joke, right? Where we get people come by the community science lab, and they're interested, they're talking about stuff, and and then you say like, hey, what happened to that guy? They seemed really interested. It's like, oh well, like. Yeah, he and his idea, like they got $50 million to drop everything and start an AI company.
Yeah.
Like wasn't he gonna work on some protein or something? But Oh, good deal.
Yeah, this
Yeah.
is the original presentation.
Yeah, that was the one before, and then
Yeah,
and
that
then
was the one.
you talked about LangChain and things like
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, this is the one which like I talked about, like what are why like I want to do the open source model, open source sustainability project with LLM agents. So it had like a lot of like proof of concepts of the multi-agent thing working and stuff.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And at the time, right, because previously it had been just an agent-based model in a kind of right. In a net, like a net logo kind of way, right? Right, Bradley?
Yeah. Well, there is a net logo component or a agent-based component to it, and we were running it, I think, also in Mesa, yeah. And then, but then that's kind of like underneath is the LangChain, and then the other, you have to generate what the agents are doing, right? Like the behavior. That was the part that was like the LLM, and then the agent-based model were the interactions. So it's like doing that kind of a hybrid model, or I guess you could use a reasoning model, but it's you could play with it in different ways.
It's let me just because you mentioned that, and because sorry, because of the paper talking about the oh look, I didn't realize James Glazier is totally coming from experimental condensed matter physics.
Yeah.
I mean, that of course makes sense, right?
Right.
Okay, so Glimprint is his organization.
Yeah.
That meets on Thursdays. Mm-hmm. So, but the previous Glimprint was focused on combining continuous models with agent-based models.
Okay.
And I thought it was super valuable. It was like extended Kalman filters for bridging these worlds that I thought would be really really valuable. I think they're taking it from. It's also talking about bridging multi-scale, but also these kind of like fundamentally different architectures, and how this had been taken from climate modeling or something. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I'll find a link, or I wonder if it's already on YouTube. But yeah, appreciate that, Sarah. I want to look at that again.
All right. Why don't we move on? I had one more thing to talk about today, and that's following up on a discussion we had 2 weeks ago about the same topic. But I had some things that to follow up on. So this is the DeepSeek and large language models conversation we had 2 weeks ago. This was Morgan and myself, and so this is one paper. This was a thing that was posted in the Slack, and it's a long document, but this is it's focusing on reinforcement learning from human feedback, and this is sort of a short introduction to RLHF, as the field is known, and post-training focused on language models. So this is sort of a hybrid model between reinforcement learning from human feedback, and then linking that up to with large language models or language models in general. And so this is actually a book, but so I'm not going to go through it, but I'm just going to kind of highlight it here. So reinforcement learning from human feedback, or RLHF, has become an important technical and storytelling tool to deploy the latest machine learning systems. In this book, we hope to give a general introduction to the core methods for people with some level of quantitative background. So this book starts with the origins of RLHF, both in recent literature and in a convergence of disparate fields of science, which include economics, philosophy, and optimal control. We should kind of highlight RLHF and dive into that in future meetings. But for now, this is just kind of talking about this area. And then we set the stage with definitions, problem formulation, data collection, and other common math used in the literature. We detail the popular algorithms and future frontiers of RLHF. So this is about RLHF, but this is actually focused on language models and post-training. So this is something to kind of think about. This is this diagram. This is actually where Schmidthuber strikes again with DeepSeek, and kind of like thinking about. I think we talked about how Schmidthuber had mentioned something about some connection to DeepSeek, or like Schmidthuber always has this thing where he did it first, and then everyone else did it later, and so this is an example of Jürgen Schmidthuber, 2018, reinforcement learning prompt engineer and world model and abstract planner collapsed into one big net. So this is like everything in the world. Like this is world models, prompt engineering based on reinforcement learning and abstract planning in this big net. And so this is kind of the diagram here where, and of course his initials are right here. And then so you have this network. It's a triangular network. You have a controller unit here, model units, and input units. So the input units are here. You have the model units internally, and then the controller units in gray. And so you have these sensory inputs, reward inputs, an input that defines the goal or the current problem. You have this humanoid robot or other type of agent out here. You have these outputs that predict future cumulative reward. An encoding of history, system history, predictions, and then predicting the goal. So that gives a t+1 to this goal t, and then that feeds back to a prediction of t at time t, and then this output here that comes out to this other agent. So this is kind of this multi-agent learning, but also within the agent where you're doing this reinforcement learning and having this world model. It doesn't really make a lot of sense without context necessarily, but this is just a nice kind of follow-up to that discussion we were having on that. This is an article that says, I don't know what fundamental limits of large language models. Recent results show that large language models struggle with compositional tasks, suggesting a hard limit to their abilities. So this is an article from, I think it's Quantum Magazine. And so multi-step logic problems can confound large language models. And this is kind of following up on the reasoning discussion we had, where, they kind of talk about this sort of these reasoning problems where, you have to decompose a sentence and compose the parts of the sentence to reason about what it means. And so they kind of focus on Einstein's puzzle or riddle. The problem tests a certain kind of multi-step reasoning, so you can actually have these kind of types of problems that are specific to multi-step reasoning. Nuha Ziri, a research scientist at the Allen Institute, and her colleagues recently set transformer-based large language models such as ChatGPT to work on such tasks and largely found them wanting. They might not be able to reason beyond what they have seen during the training data for hard tasks, or at least they do an approximation, and that approximation can be wrong. So using Einstein's riddle, they were able to probe these models and kind of come up with some fundamental limits for at least the current models to solve compositional reasoning tasks. And these are, again, transformer-based large language models. So, other types of large language models, we don't know. We just know from the transformer-based types of models. And so they're kind of figuring out what the limits, at least of these transformer-based models are. The work is really motivated to help the community make this decision about whether transformers are really the architecture we want to embrace for universal learning. So it may be that transformer-based architectures are good at certain things, but not this universal type of learning and composition. So this article goes through a lot of this reasoning and some of the things that they've been doing in that area. This other article, this is from Nature Neuroscience. This is an article, not familiar with any of the authors, but this is the architecture of the human default mode network explored through cytoarchitecture, wiring, and signal flow. This was, I don't really remember.
It's got some very classic people in neuroimaging.
Oh, okay, Sophie Volk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, you got Simon Eickhoff and Katrin Amundsen, who are, the Katrin Amundsen now runs the Human Brain Project, European Human Brain Project.
Yeah.
I think it's eBrains.
Yeah.
Alan Evans is the big guy at Montreal Neurological Institute, and all the big brain imaging studies.
Okay.
And Daniel Margulis is the guy really brought in gradient-based analysis. Although Boris Bernhardt's, amazing too, and there's probably plenty of. I mean, so Sophie Volk too, has done all this stuff. So I think I posted this.
Yeah, maybe.
Well, and it was just it's a real tour de force with some. I think there's another paper I might have also posted recently, but like just bringing together all these threads into kind of one paper.
Yeah. So I'm trying to remember why I pulled this up for this discussion where we were talking about neuroimaging in that discussion. So it may have been the default mode network that we were talking about.
Yeah. I mean, it's let's scroll down a bit more in terms of just. I think I brought it. I was in neuroscience networks just because it was just like like it was bringing together all this stuff.
Yeah, it was a cool paper. So this is about the default mode network and like how they're using histology and neuroimaging to characterize the default mode network to better understand its role in information processing and cortical communication. So, thinking about the default mode network, it's cytoarchitecturally heterogeneous. So you have different types of memory-related processing, different types of modes of processing. You have, these inputs from sensory cortex, and you have a core that's relatively insulated from environmental input, and then an analysis of signal flow with effective connectivity models that show that this default network is unique amongst cortical networks and balancing its output across a level of sensory hierarchies. So we have this, the default mode network is notorious for being misunderstood in terms of its function. I mean, people use it as like a sort of a control for a lot of neuroimaging studies, but like it's notorious for being kind of
it's always struck me, like my advisor was very and Christian Beckman, who is postdoc, was really early on defining these core networks, right? Mm-hmm. And this one being like such a dominant one, and it just kind of reminds me of EEG being discovered with alpha activity.
Yeah.
In that like you end up seeing it, like more and more you find that it's connected to everything.
Yeah.
and like it's structured, it's like by design, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like if it's connected to everything, then like how much is it adding?
Right. Yeah. Well, anyways, that's a cool paper. And then finally, we have this article here. This is actually something that I found in conjunction with what we were talking about. More about like thinking about artificial intelligence or general intelligence, and how that is sort of the goal of a lot of what people are doing, and maybe we shouldn't be thinking in that direction. So this is the number of good authors here in this space, kind of maybe critical of what's going on in modern AI research. So this is where we think about this idea of artificial general intelligence, having a general intelligence and having that be the standard for artificial intelligence. And so this kind of rethinking of this in the history of AI and kind of the Francois Chollet work that he's been publishing recently, critiquing like this idea of general intelligence. So the abstract is the AI community, research community plays a vital role in shaping the scientific, engineering, and societal goals of AI research. In this position paper, we argue that focusing on the highly contested topic of artificial general intelligence undermines our ability to choose effective goals. We identify 6 key traps, obstacles to productive goal setting that is aggravated by AGI discourse. And so those 6 key traps are illusion of consensus, supercharging bad science, presuming value neutrality, goal lottery, generality debt, and normalized exclusion. So these are like, I guess, ways in which we don't understand the goal of what research is doing. And then to avoid these traps, we argue that the AI research community needs to, 1, prioritize specificity in engineering and societal goals. So, instead of just throwing intelligence out to the world, use it for specific purposes and reasons. And, then you'll be able to develop, I guess, a more responsible, controlled model. 2, center pluralism about multiple worthwhile approaches to multiple valuable goals. And 3, foster innovation through greater inclusion of disciplines and communities. So that's something we've, of course, been championing in this meeting today. Using cognitive science methodologies and other types of methodologies. Even dynamical systems methodologies and team methodologies to sort of understand the problem. And therefore, the AGI research community needs to stop treating AGI as the North Star goal of AI research. So, this is very much criticizing this approach of general intelligence, something that we may or may not be able to define well. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And I love it, as well as, just thinking about something that came up in this great talk by this young guy who's like he's like CTO for Modal AI, but he's a recent Berkeley AI grad, or like PhD grad, and it's all about benchmarks, right? So we can talk about AGI, but as Chollet says, do you know what it is?
Right.
And like if you want to say somebody has it, if you want to say some agent has it, like, what do you mean by that? Like what test would you give it? And that's as specific as you can be,
Right.
And anyway, I think it's good to bring up Jan LeCun's recent, talk. There's a big AI action summit in Paris, where the non-US countries had some, collaboration, but some good statements came out in terms of just his re-emphasis of like LLMs, aren't the royal roads to. Sorry, there's a lot of door slamming going on upstairs. I don't know what's going on. And just how often, that LLMs aren't reasoning. Like where there was a great machine learning street talk, and it was the original developer of LSTM, and it was really great because he was just like, LLMs are just a database.
Yeah.
Like we've given it all the text.
Yeah.
Like all the text we can find. And again, like in data sci ML, I got a great talk by CMU woman, talking about the different text inputs to the different models.
Yeah.
That is also interesting. And she's just like, hey, you know what? Different text inputs, different models.
Yeah.
But like his emphasis on what we've distilled is kind of a database of the text that we started with.
Right.
And that a lot of the fine tuning is just to nudge that retrieval into patterns that we are more comfortable calling reasoning, which again ultimately come down to what are the benchmarks that we've assigned as those leaderboard metrics, right?
Yeah.
And,
So I wanted to end here with Sarrah's chat thing here. So she said, deep learning can always be trusted with the best resources for this. You mentioned some frameworks in this as well, and this is deep learning, batch, agentic design patterns. So this, I guess, is a chapter, or it's a thing here, where it kind of talks about prompting an LLM to play different roles for different parts of a complex tasks, summons a team of AI agents that can do the job most effectively. So this is like a chat based on the chat dev architecture. I think Sarrah gave a talk in the Saturday morning group like last summer, and this was like this was a slide in that talk. I remember this. And so this kind of talks about these different agentic design patterns for multi-agent collaboration. You have designing, coding, testing, documenting. That's in a waterfall model. And then you have, so this is the waterfall project management model, where you have these different phases of the project, and then you have these different agents doing this. And then you have these chat chains where these different agents from these different phases of the project kind of come together and have to communicate and then contribute things to the project. And so this is kind of like figuring out this architecture in the context of project management and collaboration. Then also I've read both ChatDev and MetaGPT from the mentioned papers in this, and definitely have both have really good results of the multi-agent framework, as well as really good results. Another a bit extensive but good resource to find anything regarding large language models that keep getting updated as well is this repository in GitHub. This looks like large language model agents papers. So this is like a repository of from
Mm,
AIGI edge runners, where they kind of have these paper lists where they get the paper and the code, and I guess it's by category: survey, planning, feedback, and reflection. So this is a good resource for like all different areas of this research domain. I like, yeah, it's very long and it has a lot of good resources in it. So check it out. Okay.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that, Sarrah. Thank you for the materials, and thank you, Morgan, for having a lot of good conversation around this and following up on this
Absolutely.
topic.
No, it's really interesting. It's like that one review paper that we kind of started with, talks about like there's a lot of overlap with cognitive science here.
Yeah.
And as well as just model building in cognitive science, and so yeah, and I love the rise of these reasoning models.
Yeah.
In terms of pushing us to think about these things, and I think we've talked before about how that any future AGI like system is going to be a hybrid system.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just certainly like we are.
Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, great papers to cover.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah,
Thanks,
definitely.
Okay.
Keep me updated on your findings as well.
Yeah.
For sure. Thanks, Sarrah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
All right. Thanks, everyone. See you next week.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye. See you next week.